My capacity today, as well, is as a board member for the Freedom Caucus and part of the communications, along with Mr. Labrador. We want to have regular communications with media because I know you're curious about what we're doing, what we're talking about, and what is our purpose and what is our place in the conference and in the Congress as a whole. But this has been under our discussion, and you're right, it is. We're looking at a very short-term reauthorization. The pay-fors are, again, very, very temporary sort of pay-fors that we typically see in these circumstances. What leadership wants to do is move up to a point in time where we can have a 5-year or long-term reauthorization. We have to have a major pay-for, and what they're looking at doing is moving to a territorial tax system, which would be a big piece of what we think tax reform is going to be like. The question is, how much will Democrats and the president go for that? And really about our base, how much will our base want to support that without cutting corporate taxes and without simplifying the tax code and lowering the income tax brackets as well. So that's all under discussion. You're right. If we get a large number in favor of any sort of bill, the Senate is less likely to send something back different. They tend to just take it up as it is. We have, I think the USA Freedom Act was a good example of that. So it's not a bad tactic, and in general, as you know, legislation begins in the House anyway. So we like to keep that momentum. We like to keep that control. And obviously, most if not all the members of the panel here today are opposed to the renewal or the restart up of the Ex-Im Bank. And so we're looking for any method to keep that from happening. So I think you're pretty much on top of where we are with that.
I would like to chime in on there. I'm one of the members of the growing group that will not vote for an extension that ends in the bewitching hour of December. It's going to have to change because we're put into a bad position before Christmas every time, and bad results end up coming out of every single one of those. Number two is I think there's some real common sense changes that we need to see in this application. How about a fair wage for a fair job that's fair to the American taxpayers, where we actually calculate Davis-Bacon appropriately and pay it systematically appropriate? That would mean taking the calculations on the calibrations from the Department of Wages and Labor and move it to the Bureau of Statistics. You could save billions. I don't want the money back. I want it left in. That gives you more opportunities for people to be hired for more projects. There's some simple common sense applications that we need to show America that something that the federal government has a lot of jurisdiction over can reward them with a solid transportation bill that's effective, efficient, and cost effective. So.
There are a number of members of the HFC who are opposed to the short-term highway bill because of the pay-fors. I think probably the majority of our group. But the strategy, as Doc indicated, is we think sound strategy. Getting it over there. USA Freedom is the best example of where that tended to work. The other thing I keep pointing out, and we just did a press event with Senator Cruz and some others, Mr. Flores and Senator Lee. It's one thing to reauthorize. It's an entirely different question to restart. And here we are 15 days into July. 6 months ago, if I'd have told any of you that we'll be 15 days into July and the Ex-Im Bank will not have been reauthorized, you'd have all laughed at me. But that's exactly where we're at, and that's a good position. Momentum, I think, is on our side. So I think the strategy that's being put in place is the best strategy to keep in this example of crony and corporate welfare, cronyism and corporate welfare from being reauthorized. I think it's the best.
Josh.
Josh Siegel with the Daily Signal. I know you're all probably pretty skeptical of the Iran agreement. Just wondering, over the next 60 days, I mean, what's the biggest question that you have or the biggest fear that you have with this deal that you'd like to get answered or, it's preventing you from supporting it?
My biggest question is how long it's going to take Iran to detonate a nuclear weapon underground, whether it's going to be a year or 2 years or 3 years. I think this is absolute horrible deal, and it is setting the world up for an arms race, a nuclear arms race, and it's a disgrace.
I'd like to add one thing is, in my mind, the big question mark is considering just how bad the deal is, and we're going to be seeing and hearing a lot more things that we gave up and got nothing in return, and also parallels with what's happened with North Korea, the deal that eventually ended up giving them the bomb, is how many Democrats are going to oppose this, that is to support a resolution of disapproval. I voted against the original Iran oversight bill because we basically flipped the Constitution on its side by requiring a 2/3 vote to disapprove instead of 2/3 vote to approve. We should have at least gone with a majority vote rather than the requirement of a supermajority to override a veto. So that's going to be the big question is, as we learn a lot of bad things about this, how many Democrats are going to be willing to vote against a resolution of disapproval?
It's a bad deal, and I'll just point out two things. There's a whole host of reasons why I think it's bad, but 14 days, you got to give them a heads up before you can come in and expect. I mean, come on. I mean, this is Iran, chief sponsor of terrorism. I mean, so that in and of itself is just wrong. And then second, when you have Israel and all the Arab nations in that area agreeing that it's bad, that should tell us something as well. So, I mean, it's a bad deal. To Doc's point, the burden was shifted with the Corker legislation. So the game is rigged in favor of getting this thing done. If you saw the president's press conference yesterday, he said Congress should weigh in on this. Congress should have a say. Well, of course, because he knows it's going to take 67 members of the Senate to disapprove it. The game's rigged in his favor because of that bill. So that's why some of us voted against that when it was presented to us, because we said this is going to facilitate exactly that moment yesterday when the president stood up at the press conference and said Congress should weigh in. Well, heck yeah, they should. He wants them to weigh in because he knows the game's all rigged in his favor. We got a tough fight to get that supermajority to disapprove this. I hope we can, for the sake of our ally, our number one ally, Israel, and as Mr. Buck pointed out, just for general safety and for people around the world. So we will see. It's going to be an important debate over the next 60 days.
I'd like to add to to Mr. Jordan. It's going to be interesting because we have an August recess in which we can actually see what the American people do. And I'd like to issue a challenge to all the folks out there across the country. It's time to pepper your senators and hold them accountable, right and left, whether they're Republican or Democrat, to be part of something to take that down to make sure that we have true authorization and oversight of that. So I challenge the American people to really get in front of your senators and your Congress people's face.
You know, for me, I just have an even more fundamental question. I haven't reviewed the agreement yet, so I can't tell you what I think of the agreement itself. But I have a fundamental and foundational question. When you have the country of Iran that is still keeping political prisoners, and we're making deals with them. I have a constituent, Pastor Saeed Abedini, is in my district, and his family has been trying to get the release of their father and husband since 2012. The president made some promises to the family that they were going to try to work on this. They didn't. They make promises that they were contingent on the agreement, but when they claim that they want to be part of the community of nations, that they want to have constructive engagement in the world, and they're unwilling to release these political prisoners, I don't know why we're making any agreements with them. When on the same day that we're signing this agreement, they're talking about death to Israel and death to the USA, I don't know how we can be engaging in any kind of negotiations with a country that is unwilling to really become part of the community of nations. So, so I'm very disturbed without even looking at the agreement, and I'm sure I will be more disturbed after I read the agreement.
Congressman Jones, I know that you have a question, or you wanted to speak to the issue of Congress's role and authority when it comes to our armed forces around the world. Does this agreement and what's going to be the discussion in August recess with a lot of constituents, do you think this is an opportunity to bring up the AUMF question?
Well, I, like Raul said, I want to read the document first. I've got my own conclusions that maybe is not fair because I do have my doubts about this agreement, but I still think I owe it to the people of my district and the people of America to read the document and then make my public statements. So I'm going to hold off on the Iranian deal. I do feel that as we continue to, whether it be the peace deal with Iran or the continued bombing in Iraq that we're doing daily, that we in Congress are missing an opportunity, especially conservatives who are advocates of the Constitution, to allow the leadership of the House of Representatives to continue to let the administration bomb in these in Iraq and other parts of the Middle East. Yet we have not had a debate on the floor of the House with a AUMF, a new AUMF authorization of military force. We're still allowing the President to use the AUMFs that were given to Bush in 2001, 2002. And I, along with other members of Congress, some on this diocese today, have written Speaker Boehner 3 or 4 times asking him to initiate a UMF. It is, as Madison said, it's the responsibility of the legislative branch to study and declare, in fact, I'll read it real quickly. The power to declare war, including the power of judging the causes of war, is fully and exclusively vested in the legislature. But yet, the leadership of the House continues to say to President Obama, you need to send us an AUMF. Well, President Obama sent him one in February, and we did nothing with it. The committees never even brought it up to discuss it. And so many of us believe sincerely that as we move forward in the Middle East, we need to have a debate on the floor of the House to meet our constitutional responsibility and to debate a new authorization of military force. So I think that we are not doing our constitutional duty by allowing this administration, I would say the same thing if it was a Republican administration, to continue to spend millions and millions of dollars and also put our young men and women in harm's way.
Next question. Yes, sir. We'll go up here in the front row.
Thanks. I'm Peter Sullivan with The Hill. Leadership seems to be saying they're not going to meet the July 24th deadline for reconciliation on Obamacare and push that to the fall. And I wonder, are you going to be putting pressure on them to meet that July 24th deadline? Would you be disappointed if they didn't meet it and the issue got kind of pushed off until the fall or some other time?
I certainly would be disappointed. I did vote against the budget when it first came through the House, but upon assurances from leadership that once it came out of conference committee with the strengthened language, we would take up, use reconciliation for the repeal, then I did vote for the budget. But it's not just disappointed. I think we are missing an opportunity, and again suggest to Republicans across America that the main issue, the #1 issue that we won on in 2010, 2012, and 2014, that we still don't have the courage to take it up and put it on the president's desk, and we certainly haven't had the courage to actually take a vote for a patient-centered replacement. I have served for 4.5 years up here. I've had 58 votes to repeal and 0 votes to replace. I think a reconciliation package should include what we're for, not just what we're against. And this not only sets us up as we move into 2016 for the appropriations debate, but also for the 2016 campaign. I think it's imperative if we want to win in 2016, we've got to show a bold, positive vision and not just a no to everything that President Obama has proposed for 8 years.
Thanks. Scott Wong, also with the Hill newspaper. Mr. Jordan, I know that you and other Freedom Caucus co-founders met with Mr. McCarthy earlier this week on the highway bill. Are you personally opposed or supporting the short-term extension, and how do you see this scenario playing out, you know, this chess game, if you will, playing out with the Senate on short-term highway?
We'll see. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the pay-fors in the legislation, but I do think strategically, if we can get a bill over there, great. I don't like the pay-fors, and probably am not going to support the legislation, but I like the idea, as Dr. Fleming mentioned earlier, and we had talked about when the USA Freedom Act went over there, and I didn't like elements of that legislation. We tried to amend it, actually, with Mr. Massey's amendment. The fact is that when we got it over there, that's what the Senate ended up accepting, and it was better than what they were initially proposing. So there's some strategic benefit to what's going on, and we'll see how it plays out. What I do know is what I said earlier. We're 15 days into July, and XM hasn't been reauthorized, and that's a good thing for taxpayers, and frankly a good message for us to say we're actually dealing with this issue of corporate welfare, and the biggest example of that is the Export-Import Bank, so that's all positive.
Other questions?
Let me follow up on
Right.
that, just to establish that opposition to reauthorization or restarting XM Bank is an official position of the Freedom Caucus. And with regard to this temporary legislation, we see the XM Bank as the non-reauthorization as the highest priority. It's far more important than what happens for 6 months with transportation. But we do have 3 official positions. One is the XM Bank. The other is the First Amendment Defense Act, Raul Labrador's bill, that would protect companies, persons, individuals, as well as corporations from losing their tax status and other contracts, being discriminated on federal contracts because of expression of their religious and moral convictions. And then, if you may recall, the D.C. abortion disapproval resolution, that's our official position to disapprove that as well. So just wanted to make sure you understood where we are as a caucus.
Should bring the microphone back.
Depends if there's the real savings on the mandatory side. If you remember, a little over 2 years ago, we went to our retreat in Williamsburg, and the entire plan was if in fact we're going to deviate from the caps, there had to be real reforms on the mandatory side that actually put us on a direct path to balance the budget in 10 years. We had to actually make the changes that we typically put in our budget plan. We actually have to make that happen. So it would have to be something along those lines, I think, before we would, a lot of members, I'm not talking HFC or RSC or folks up here, but I think that's always been the conservative Republican position, is those caps are there until we get the kind of mandatory savings that are actually going to help us long-term deal with the $18 trillion debt. Short of that, I think if it's, you know, I think to break the caps is wrong unless we're getting that kind of savings that is real, and not the gimmicky kind of stuff that sometimes seems to happen in Washington, but the real kind of savings that's going to put us on that path to dealing with this problem and doing what we told the American people we're going to do when they elected us in 2010.
If I could speak very quickly to that, I think you see with Donald Trump, his success, the frustration with the American people, their frustration with Congress. It's as much about Congress as it is about illegal immigration. We have not done the job of keeping our promise to the American people. And I'm from Eastern North Carolina. I'm not speaking for anyone else on this panel, but I can tell you that the frustration is the deepest I've seen in 20 years of being up here. And when you have the Republicans in the House spending money like Democrats, the people back home, they read what you write, they got their own opinions, and they're frustrated. And Donald Trump is a prime example of how that frustration is coming to the forefront.
Yes, ma'am.
Deirdre Walsh with CNN. Since you mentioned Mr. Trump, he is, I know it's a little early for presidential polls, but he is at the top of the polls today and national poll, and he's also doing well in some polls in early primary states. Just wondering what you all think of his impact so far on the race for the Republican nomination.
Well, I would have to agree with Mr. Jones. He has tapped into something. I've noticed it in my district. I see heads nodding over here. Our constituents are over the top frustrated with us, particularly on the conservative side. We promised them that Washington would change if they would just give Republicans the House of Representatives, and we did. We delivered on that. And yet we've not delivered on any change in the way Washington works, because we said that we would also have to have the Senate too. So they give us the Senate, and still, in their view, nothing has changed. So the frustration level is over the top and off the grid. And I think that whether you agree with Mr. Trump or not, whether you like his style or not, he's definitely tapped into a pent-up demand of frustration.
Any other members want to comment on that one?
I'm going to comment on, I will not comment on Mr. Trump. I actually am at many times a very poor media consumer, and I haven't been listening to any of the presidential discussion, but I do listen to folks back home, and I also have, over the last 4.5 years, I've conducted almost 300 town halls, and the discontent and the concern that Representative Jones mentioned is what I've heard for over 4 years. And it's growing. And what I fear in this town is that you have a Republican establishment. Since it's the same thing, but I think voters have only two choices. It's either for Hillary or for the Republican candidate. But there is a third choice, and that's this growing concern, is the choice to stay home and not participate in a presidential election. Particularly when we're talking about values voters, that we have a striking Supreme Court decision that tells 51 million Americans they're wrong on marriage. By a slight 5-4 decision, there's been absolutely no response from the House, nothing from the Senate. A Supreme Court decision on Obamacare, and the response has been, well, we can't use reconciliation, even though we promised to do that. They see this non-response, but when you have somebody like Mr. Trump or others apparently talking about and representing that frustration, I can see why folks are attracted to that. But I fear, at least in my district, and again it varies, and that folks are just about ready to give up on the political system, and in particular ready to give up on a Republican Party that says they're conservative, but then doesn't deliver on that in Washington.
Yes.
Natalie Johnson with the Daily Signal. In light of the Planned Parenthood video that was released yesterday, what do you intend to do about that?
Planned Parenthood is a vile, evil organization that has a racist history. It's shocking if folks knew and recognize the history of and their connections to eugenics. This shouldn't surprise you, I would say, on this particular issue of buying and selling and trafficking in body parts. I mean, it's almost vile to discuss. We stumbled upon this in Kansas in the late 90s and passed some laws and restrictions on this. At that time, it was suggested it was just a local Planned Parenthood George Tiller issue, but we suspected at the time it was a nationwide trafficking that's going on. I'm excited to see, and maybe that's a proper word, but gratified to see that our speaker and various leaders are demanding hearings. That's a minimum we should do. But I will warn you, once you start looking at this, you're going to see much more and even worse things, I believe, if you start pulling into the largest abortion provider in their entire nation that still receives hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer subsidies every year. And this is just the beginning of what we should do. I certainly want to defund Planned Parenthood for all kinds of reasons, but this is shocking, and hopefully media will continue to report the reality of what goes on behind those clinic doors.
Well said.
And most of us removed our names yesterday as co-sponsors of the COIN legislation that would provide some of the proceeds from the COIN to the same organization that has been linked to the trading of body parts. So you saw immediately yesterday a reaction where many members removed their names as co-sponsors of that legislation.
And I think it's important to point out, this is not the first time Planned Parenthood's been engaged in something that the vast majority of probably all Americans think is just flat out wrong. And the idea that they're getting, the families I get the privilege of representing, their tax dollars is, when we have those hearings, the focus should be all the bad things that are going on there, and the idea that they're getting our taxpayers' dollars. That's what needs to stop. So looking forward to the hearings.
I might add that I, for one, am very willing to have taxpayer funds available to Planned Parenthood on one condition. If any Planned Parenthood organization anywhere helps someone get an abortion, then no federal funds. Because if they really are a women's health organization, and I would hope they would be, because that is the tone that they have tried to present themselves in these debates. They've said it's all about women's health, and the Republicans are just proposing a war on women. Well, if they really are about women's health, and I wish they would be, then we should continue to provide them with taxpayer funds. But one abortion in one Planned Parenthood affiliated organization anywhere, and that money should be cut off. No taxpayer funds should be affiliated with something that so many people find completely reprehensible.
Maria Trujillo with The Hill. This is directed specifically at Representative Jordan and Buck. I believe you guys both missed the patent vote in the Judiciary Committee. I was hoping to get your positions on the bill and just more broadly what you've been hearing on the conservative side of the caucus about the bill.
There were some interesting I typically don't miss votes, particularly on important legislation like that, but there were some interesting things going on. Mr. Buck was personally involved in one of them, and we had a colleague who was subcommittee chair and still subcommittee chair of a committee on the Oversight Committee that we were involved with that particular day. I think that's the day it was, pretty sure. I'm looking at the bill. I got concerns, frankly, right now that you're seeing folks who didn't necessarily weigh in on this issue in previous Congresses when we've dealt with it now come forward and say there are real concerns there. Everyone wants to get at the troll issue, the idea that these guys just suing people, and the tort reform aspect of this we certainly want to deal with, and it's something that earlier versions of this legislation in previous Congresses motivated me to support it. But there's a difference between trolls and people who actually invent things. There's a difference between trolls and universities. There's a difference between trolls and people who set up a company and marketing a product based on the patent that they've come up with. So that's the questions we're trying to deal with, and we'll see what happens with the legislation. But I have some concerns, and I've expressed those to other members of the committee.
I think it is well-intentioned to try to deal with the troll issue. I don't know that it goes far enough in other areas like discovery and venue, and I imagine that the bill is going to get reworked before it is, we see a final bill at this point. So I don't know where it is, but I know that Congressman Massey has patents, and so he's probably the person to talk to about this.
Yeah. I've got a few opinions, and thanks for asking that question. Look, we're supposed to be about jobs and the economy, right? That's what the American people want us to do. They didn't send us here to damage jobs and the economy. And I spoke with my alma mater last week, MIT. They pointed out if you take all of the companies that were founded by MIT graduates that are still alive, we're not talking about Alfred Sloan and General Motors. We're talking about living founders, MIT companies, add up all their gross revenues. It's about the 12th biggest country's GDP in the world. That's out of one university. And the universities are against this patent bill, the venture capitalists are against this patent bill, and the inventors are against this patent bill. It should worry us that we're even discussing bringing a bill like this to the floor that has that kind of opposition from the kind of folks we say we're going to support, the small businessmen. This bill, we're talking about crony capitalism in Ex-Im Bank, that pales to the crony capitalism in H.R. 9, because this is all about the big companies coming to Washington, D.C. and trying to tilt the balance of power in the courtroom against the small guy. And this country was founded on the notion that what you create is yours. That's different from all the socialist ideas that we left behind when we came to this country. And so patents are in the Constitution. And the notion that you can have your day in court if somebody steals your property is enshrined in the Constitution. That's what we're messing with here with H.R. 9. And that's why Republicans should be against it. Congressman Gosar is on top of this issue, too. We did a joint press release yesterday with Senators Vitter and Coons and some other congressmen from here in the House talking about why this is a bad bill for the economy. And it would just be horrible if we're talking about crony capitalism and stopping it in the Ex-Im, and then we enable it with H.R. 9. And we talk about how Obamacare is hurting the economy, and then we go damage the economy ourselves by diminishing property rights in the sense of patents. So, yeah, I got a few opinions.
Does anyone else have an opinion on the subject they'd like to share? All right.
By the way, this bill's in trouble. And I think by the end of this week, you're going to hear that maybe the bill's been pushed out or something.
Oh, thank you, Genevieve. I'm Jolie Friedman. I'm with Newsmax. To go back to the Iran deal just for a second, it's going to be extremely difficult to get the majority needed to override a presidential veto, if that's what it comes to. So I'm wondering what you all think the likelihood is of convincing Democrats to oppose Mrs. Clinton, who's already come out saying that she supports this.
I think there will be a robust effort for those of us on both sides of the aisle and both sides of Capitol Hill to reach out to people who are undecided about the Iran deal to encourage them to oppose it. So I think you'll see an unprecedented, perhaps, amount of person-to-person, member-to-member discussions and efforts to persuade each other as to just how ill-advised this is. When I hear the Prime Minister of Israel say this is an historic mistake, think about the history of the Middle East, how far it goes back. So when you have their leaders saying this is an historic mistake, put it in context. Think about the history that those cultures have been through. Think about the tilting of any semblance of balance that will occur in the Middle East among Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Israel, the UAE, Kuwait, Pakistan, and then you get India involved. This is so destabilizing in a place that is only precariously stable right now. I think this will be an opportunity for members to approach members in the most sincerely objective, nonpartisan way to say, please, let's work together as members of the legislative branch and override this veto.
I'm just going to say that that's why I said what I said earlier. I challenge the American people to make this the issue of the August recess, to take us to task and ask us for validation, to explain the deal, to explain why we even went into the deal, the cockamamie idea that you start with a low position instead of a very aggressive position. Have them define the differences between the Persians and the Arabic peoples. It's a very different conversation piece, and it's important for so we don't replicate the future by past decisions. So I challenge the American people, you can do this, and we need your help.
I think it's also important to note that the negotiators gave us a break by giving us the 60-day time period and not just the 30-day time period. We're going to be back in our districts for 30 days, and I think the American people are going to have access to members of Congress, and those members are going to be swayed by the opinions of the strong opinions of members or of constituents, and I think this August break is going to be a critical time for America to stand up and oppose this treaty and let members know that. So if we had rushed this through in July, it might be a different story, but having members home in August, I think, is going to help us in trying to get to the number we need to override the veto.
Can I ask you just, I mean, if you look at some of the polling, this is not the issue that most Americans have been paying attention to up until maybe yesterday, in all fairness to them, but have you all been hearing in your offices from, I mean, did you get phone calls yesterday when the president made the announcement? Have you been hearing from your constituents on this?
Well, Christians United for Israel was in town this week. And so in the case of the 49 states, including mine, that were represented here, most of us have had conversations this very week from our constituents specifically. But it's perhaps coincidental since Christians United for Israel was in town this week.
Time for
I think Ken's point real quick is that, and Cynthia's too, is that the American people are going to more and more be engaged, because I think this is going to be at the forefront for the next 30 to 40 days. I don't think this is going to fall behind another issue or anything else. I think this will be the primary issue for the next 30 or 40 days, and it will be constant. And that's when the American people will learn and become engaged. And I think that's going to be what's going to really make the difference.
Time for one final question. All right, thank you all very much. Thank you to the members as well, and we will look forward to seeing everybody back here in September. Thank you.